Welcome to Talk Heathen. I'm Christy Powell, and while I'm making this speech, I've had the privilege of spending the weekend with my Christian family members who are watching along from the other side of the house. While it really is a privilege to have a family that is accepting and loving in that way, I'm reminded that when we look past the labels, Christian, atheist, Muslim, humanist, we find that most communities of belief or non-belief share the same goals: to understand the world, to ease suffering, to nurture compassion, and to live with integrity. We often express that through service, ritual, and shared meaning, ideally with reason, empathy, and ethical responsibility. Different paths for sure, but maybe in the same direction? Building a world where kindness, curiosity, and courage guide us more than fear or dogma. My hope is that we can let go of magical thinking and ancient tradition to walk that path in a way that makes a little bit more sense. What does that look like in a divided 2025? Well, let's talk about it, because the show is coming right now. All right, welcome everyone. Today is October 19th, 2025. I'm your host, Christy Powell. Joining me again is my good friend, Jamie the Blind Limey. Jamie, glad to be here with you.
Hello. Oh, there we are. I'm here. So I'm doing all right, man. Sort of talk, don't want to get too much into certain weeds, but there was big events yesterday, and I'm sure among those thronging multitudes were a mix of both believers and non-believers, multiple faiths from all over their respective communities, all coming together to exercise their First Amendment rights and sort of fight for what they believe is correct. And it heartens me to see people who may have certain ideological or epistemological differences, just kind of putting those aside until things have settled, and then we can have a nice chat about whether God is real over a pint or whatever.
Sure.
It's just that while I very much champion wanting people to link together for the betterment of humanity, to embrace reason, to embrace humanism, there are still people out there that use their faith as a cudgel and as an excuse for their own depredations and bigotry. And I can't bring myself to tolerate that. But then again, I don't think a lot of other believers can either.
Yeah, no, fair to say. I appreciate you being heartened by the people coming together to, express themselves. Therapists can be a little bit of heat-seeking missiles for problems and areas of distress. We're always looking for that tender part that hurts. So the therapist in me can't help but wonder about all of the division in families as people are expressing their opinions and standing up for what they feel is right. All of the tension that comes with that. And I am interested to have some conversations today about how we sort of build bridges past some of this and learn to find our common ground in the midst of all of that division. Yeah,
I'm hoping for some believers to call in. But if you're not a believer, but you're having trouble navigating those kinds of conversations or reconciling the fact that people around you may believe things that you don't, and that's causing friction, we're happy to talk to you as well. Of course, we are keeping it mainly towards matters of faith and connection, but that kind of thing is kind of inextricably linked with the human condition. Even us that do not have faith in a higher power, that do not have a religious belief or a God belief, we still have to believe in things, trust in things, hold things as core parts of our own personality. And when things challenge that, and often for people in these circles, it's people challenging it with their own supernatural belief and feeling that supersedes ours, that's where that friction can happen. And that's where people who otherwise would be very affectionate to each other, very, very filled with camaraderie, do break. I personally have some divisions with my family over certain topics. We have also had conversations about spirituality, even though a lot of my family are not explicitly religious. The fact that I am skeptical of even their more esoteric beliefs has caused arguments. I have been called a spoilsport. I have been called a cynic. I have been called mean and rude before now because I have a kind of a zero tolerance policy to bullshit for my shame. So yeah, how about yourself, Christy? I mean, it sounds like you've had a lot of quite terse conversations of late.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually been incredibly pleasant. You know, there has been a lot of building bridges, but that's been a huge part of my story. You know, we don't have to get into like my whole genogram, but while I am very privileged to have a mother and a father who have both like attended these shows and, you know, had taken an interest in the work that I'm doing here, even though they hold a faith tradition, I also have a stepfather that was very important to my life and that very much helped raise me, who I haven't spoken to in just about a decade because of divisions around these types of topics. So, you know, building those bridges is definitely something that I am passionate about and have experienced a lot of privilege in. And it's something that I, you know, have struggled to do and have a lot of hurt around. So I'm very interested to hear our callers' experiences and questions. Talk Heathen is a live call-in show, and we do have open lines. So get your calls in at 512-991-9242 or from your computer at tiny.cc/callth. You know, of course, on Talk Heathen, we are open to all of your questions about religion, secular humanism, atheistic morality, cosmology, philosophy, science, history, life, the universe, and everything. And we're talking today a bit about building bridges between religious and non-religious communities. But is there a caller or a question that you're hoping to hear from today, Jamie?
Yeah. So there is something that literally just popped into my head. Many faiths, especially Abrahamic ones that have a sort of prophet figure, have this figure who is a paragon. They are the exemplar, be it Jesus or Muhammad or whomever, that is the giver or at least the teacher of morality and how to best approach the world. And I'd like to ask believers in those kinds of teachers, those kinds of and who feel that their morals come from their faith, can you forgive me and be an ally with me if I too act in a manner that is congruent with those morals without believing that they came from a divine source? Or is that still a no-go? Like, because I deny that it comes from God, despite living a good life and trying to help people, is that a game changer for you? Is that an ender for you?
Can we accept different paths up the mountain, or is the mountain itself built around belief that, you know, God sent his only begotten son who died for our sins? Like, do we need to adhere to these types of credos in order to find meaning or fulfillment and common ground together?
Because I will tell you straight up now, and I'm going to look straight in the camera, that despite the fact that I will happily, as I say, debate the existence and reality of these figures, I currently don't really mind or care if you are exhibiting reasoned humanist standpoints and a morality I can get behind because you believe that it's what Jesus would do. I will happily, gladly, joyously join you in whatever endeavor is going to make everyone we care about happier, safer, healthier, and more secure. And then, like I say, when the fighting's done, when the sea has calmed, we can go and have a hot chocolate, and I'll tell you, I don't believe what you believe, and why do you believe it? And we can get back to that kind of fun that we used to have before the dark times.
Fair to say. Yeah, well, I'll remind folks that Talk Heathen is a product of the Atheist Community of Austin, a 501c3 nonprofit organization dedicated to the promotion of atheism, critical thinking, secular humanism, and the separation of religion and government. We are a live call-in show, and we're excited to hear from you, so we hope that you'll jump on the lines. Before we do any of that, I do want to thank the video and audio people, the moderators, notes and stamp takers, the call screeners that all help make this show work. Thank you so much for all of your efforts. This week, we want to send a special thanks to James Shugart. James is one of our audio techs helping make the ACA productions of Talk Heathen, as well as several others. A continued success. Thank you, James.
Thank you. Absolutely, James. He's kind of like part of, as close as we get to like air traffic control. He's the voice in our ear just before we launch kind of thing. He's all in the background. One of the last voices we hear before we start the show. And if he and the others weren't doing as good of a job as they are, you would be able to see us or hear us or even tune in, because everything would be horribly broken and neither Christy nor I know how to fix it.
Yeah, fair to say. All right. Well, let's bring our backup host, Aaron, in because I am interested to have a little bit deeper conversation here about some of these questions of how do we build coalitions? How do we make space for one another while also, holding steady to our mission and some of these other issues? Jamie, let me pose this to you. Where do we draw the line on forming those coalitions of different belief systems while still being intolerant of the intolerable? What does that mean? What does that look like as we're trying to approach these things from different angles?
Well, I'll give my quick answer, and then I'd like to hear Aaron's as well. Right. The line I draw. There are many things we can discuss. There are many subjects where I am happy to have a discussion, because there may be... I may be able to have my mind changed, or there may be wiggle room. There may be a middle to come to. If there's a place where there's a middle to come to, I'm happy to come to it. Human rights is not that. Human rights and personal autonomy is non-negotiable. So if your belief system requires you to essentially rob someone of their agency, or to remove a human right that we have all agreed on to generally be a right for all people, then there is no middle to come to. I can't, but I will not be budged on things like marriage equality, female reproductive healthcare access, LGBT rights, and these are all things that have been heavily assaulted by people who are saying they are doing it in the name of their God. So if that's you, I'm sorry, I don't think I'd be able to agree on some of it and then not all of it. And then on the other hand, I would think that a good coalition would understand we have differences and allow those differences to be expressed. So if you were to come into the Free Thought Library and join us as a believer and work with us on projects, and we are hoping to do more stuff in outreach in the future, we are not going to need you to decry your faith. We're not going to need you to defend your faith. We're not going to need you to prove the existence of your deity to work with us, because you're already through the door and comfortable enough in our presence. Just don't say anything offensive.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so I heard you say, human rights, like that's where we draw the line. And you identified like bodily autonomy. And I suppose we wouldn't necessarily say queer marriage, but rather like the right to marry who we choose to, or to love who we choose to. But even that question of like human rights, what is a universal human right, gets really murky when we're coming at it from different angles, when we have different ideas about who bestowed upon us or how we come to that understanding of human rights. Is there any universality there? I know that's a really big question, but can you try to walk us through how we can even agree on what rights we as humans have?
So I'm going to crib from a couple of people who I very much admire. One is George Carlin, and then I'm also going to take something that I stole from another Face in Our Space, and say that human rights are actually just generally agreed privileges. Like there's no innate right that anyone has, because rights are things that we are allowed to do by the people around us. Like you don't innately have a right to do anything. You are allowed to express the things that everyone agrees are rights. That was George Carlin's thing, and that when a system of power can take something from you, It's not an innate right, it's a privilege. So we have been granted these sets of privileges. But to quote another person in the space, I'm down for allowing, or at least entertaining the allowance of anything through a lens of humanism, of secular humanism, or just humanism generally, maximum flourishing, minimal suffering, and then coming to a consensus as to whether it promotes that flourishing or diminishes that suffering, and therefore allow it. And if it doesn't do that thing, if it increases suffering or diminishes flourishing to a certain extent, then it is not a right. It may be a circumstantial privilege, or it may be forbidden. But I think we have to allow everything and then take certain things off the table as they are proven to be harmful, rather than to be completely restrictive and give only certain rights, because that way you get only certain people getting certain rights, and only certain genders getting certain rights, and only certain creeds or religions getting certain rights. So that's how I'd approach it. I don't know about you.
No, I very much appreciate that lens, and it does help us to have at least a shared language on like where these things come from and how they're derived. But it kind of gets us back to square one if we can't even agree on what a human right really is, if we're coming at it from these different perspectives. Because while I totally appreciate what you're saying about human flourishing versus human suffering and trying to come up with, these universal maxims or however else we want to frame it to try and maximize or optimize those things, that's not how everybody's going to approach it. Plenty of people are going to say, well, I have the right to take dominion over the earth because God told me to. And that's what makes it a human right. So we're right back to, how do we have these discussions? How do we build these coalitions? Now, let me actually go ahead and use this as a moment to bring Aaron in and see if he has anything to add to this, or if there is any sort of universality here.
I am not. I probably couldn't. I can't name the universal. I'm not that educated or trained in philosophy and things like that.
Sure, but even just on a fundamental level, like if we can't even agree to what a right is, how do we find common ground with other people about it?
Yeah, I think the struggle and the effort is a feature. It's not a bug. Right. I think It's always going to be a struggle. We all have different opinions. We all have different ways. We're raised differently. We have different values. So we're all going to see things differently. And the only way that is going to work together is if we come together, hash it out, and compromise. I've got to give up a little. You've got to give up a little. And somewhere in the middle, we'll meet and figure it out. And today's rights might be different than tomorrow's rights, because we have different viewpoints today than people 50, 100, 200 years ago, right?
Sure.
And
yeah.
People in 50, 100 years from now, they're going to have different viewpoints. Like, I bet you the medical community is going to look back at how we did medicine today in 100 years and like, oh my gosh, that was barbaric. I can't believe they did that. So like we do,
or 10 years.
Yeah. When we look
we're
back,
doing it right.
50, 100 years, we're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe they used to treat people that way. Well, because we're all learning and we're all growing. And, we live in a world of differences. That's really the only common theme, is that everybody's different. And we have to find a way of, we need to find some kind of baseline. And we're here arguing that baseline is humanism, is the intrinsic, I don't want to use the word divinity, but maybe the word divinity of every human being, and that every human being has the right to be here and live the life they want to do. So let's make a society where people can do that and they're free to do that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so if we can't necessarily agree on what is a right or what is a like intolerable thing for people to be intolerant to, or a tolerable thing for us to be intolerant of, or, oh no, I've gone cross-eyed. If we're still kind of stuck in that miry place of not having clear lines or clear ways to draw those lines, how do we get along with our family? Or should we get along? Is there a point at which we should no longer be yielding ground or making space should we ruin Thanksgiving? Like what can y'all say on some of those topics, or how to walk through that, at least in a way that is wise and kind and curious? So
I'm cribbing a bit from your worksheet here, Christy, on language around these kinds of topics, because I've heard it's setting boundaries and finding common ground, where it's find something to agree on, anything to agree on, at least to start with, especially if the schism is broad. Something that you may have agreed on in the past, or something that is so simple that you both agree on, like we both like turkey. That's a start. But as flippant as that sounds, it might be just that little foot in the door. But set boundaries. If there are certain things that will be a spark for the tinder of argument and division, if you're comfortable enough just putting it aside, even if you've got that little voice in the back of your head going, they still believe this thing that I don't agree with, then you can do so for the sake of relationships. But again, there is only so far you can push that. If you come from a family who, through either secular or religious reasons, does not believe that living as a queer person or living as a trans person is a legitimate, valid way to live, and you are a queer or trans person in their family, now I don't have first-hand experience of this, but I have been honoured to speak to and be friends with many people in the community. It's incredibly difficult to sit there knowing that the people around you who are supposed to love you think you're an abomination, think you're wrong, that you are improper in some way by your very existence. And some people just can't ignore that. That's a claw in the back of your head. That's an itch you can't scratch. And so you just disengage. And it's sad. But I do think that as much as we want to build these coalitions and build these bridges, we have to build them with people who at their very base are willing to accept who we are in the moment. And if your family can't do that, then it might not be entirely salvageable. But if they can at least acknowledge they have these misgivings, but say we're still going to support you in any way we can, despite not understanding it, despite actually being a little bit offended by it. Again, it would vary person to person and topic to topic and boundary to boundary. But maybe you can live with that and hope that they come around later. But I don't think it behooves anyone, especially if they are marginalised or on the outsides. It's not their responsibility to be the first one to come to the table, because they're not the one in the position of power, the position of authority and majority.
Sure. Well, so if I take a lot of what you said and try to find the hard lines the edges that we can maybe wrap our hands around, I think I'm getting the sense that we're talking about the difference between maybe accepting not necessarily somebody's behavior, but accepting somebody despite their behavior is one category of things, whereas failing to accept somebody because of their identity is another. A certain action, a certain willingness to do a thing is different from rejecting somebody based on something that is like fundamental or foundational to who they are, their race, their gender, their sexuality, things along those lines. Yeah. Is that an important line to draw here? Yeah, I'd say so. And am I valid? Yes or no? If the answer is no, then I'm sorry, then there isn't much we can do here. And this is why, as an atheist voice, as a content creator of sorts, I do get a little bit annoyed when people try and strawman us by saying, "Oh, you hate religion, you hate religious people, you're just so full of hate for everybody." And I'm like, I'm not. I accept everyone of faith. I can disagree as to the reasons they came to it, but I'm not going to tell them that they are intrinsically wrong for believing in a higher power.
it's that same kind of, it's that horrible slippery slope to calling people mentally ill for being religious or stupid or crazy and all these kinds of really denigrating terms. So I'm not going to call someone invalid. I'm not going to say you're living your life wrong or you are offensive to me. I can point out things I find offensive in the dogmas and stuff around their faith. But I'm not going to find faith itself anything other than maybe bafflingly irrational, but not offensive. Like, fine. And all I would ask is that they have the same courtesy for me, that because I am not religious, and because I am progressive, do not then say, because of these things, you are a wrong creature, you're a bad thing, and you need correcting, and I won't accept you for this. And that sometimes gets twisted into, love the sinner, hate the sin. And it's like, yeah, but you think I embody sin? Like, I don't think a lot of people who say that can actually extrapolate or extricate, separate the sinner and the sin. Like, it's like, well, you're living in sin. At
what point does it become identity?
Yeah.
Like, you can make the statement like, no, it's okay that you're gay, just don't act on your gayness, which of course is, a pretty like bad faith separation.
Yeah, is sin something I've done or something I am? Because if you think it's something I am, again, we are going to have problems.
Yeah, Aaron, how does all that strike you?
Yeah, I draw the line at abusive behavior and language. Like, if somebody is going to be name calling, going to be yelling, going to get violent, that we need to go our separate ways and not have a relationship, because you can't have a relationship when that kind of behavior is going on. Other than that, I think we have to meet people where they are. And if that is a bigoted place and they have bigoted beliefs, so be it. But if we can have a conversation about it, then I think that's the win. If we can sit down and talk about, hey, this is what I believe, this is what you believe, and if we can walk away still having a relationship, I think that's what's important. It's the relating with people that's really important, because once you have a relationship with somebody and maybe they're a Christian, you're an atheist, and they get to see that they get to have a relationship with an atheist. They know, oh, this is what atheists are like, right? It's really change, I think, comes from relating to people and maybe relating to people that are different. So as bigoted as some people are, hey, if you're going to be kind and you're going to be able to have a conversation, let's do it. Let's talk about it. Because I think that's using our big boy words, using our big girl words, using our adult words. That's where we can maybe have a conversation, have a relationship.
Yeah, I hear that. Well, so setting aside people's beliefs, I guess, in like this fundamental values kind of way, like putting that conversation aside a little bit, if we're trying to just build community with people who have different values, different beliefs than us, how appropriate, how acceptable, quote unquote, is it to invite people to participate in our rituals or to participate in other people's rituals? Thanksgiving being just around the corner, is it okay if your family wants to open Thanksgiving dinner with a prayer? Are you obligated to sit there with your eyes open and your arms folded? Like, how much can we play along? Is it acceptable to go to a Christmas night service sort of thing? What kind of lines can you all draw for us there?
I think at that point, it's a question of, are they forcing you to or not? Because if they are trying to compel you to do it and are going to treat you badly if you don't, then it's not your choice anymore, and then that's not appropriate. I would be hesitant to feel like I must do these things to be accepted. However, when you are stepping into someone else's world, you may want to respect what they do, even though you don't believe in the reasons they do it. I think it is fine as long as the other people there, the people who do believe, don't mind you engaging in the rituals and the procedures, knowing that you are secular, knowing that you are not part of their faith, but are wanting to get involved with that which they are so closely tied. I think that could build a bridge. I've been to Christmas masses. I've sung we sing carols. I've been in a nativity play. Yes, it's kind of societally enforced, but do I regret it? Do I think it was a bad thing? No, I don't. I think that it's perfectly fine to get involved in the religious practices of your family if they're willing to have you and you're interested to do so, as long as they're not compelling you to do it on pain of expulsion or something, or punishment.
That uncoerced consent component is incredibly important here, of course. And I mean, that's going to be true of anything. Like if you are willingly joining along without feeling like your arm is being twisted, by all means. I also just want to validate, as we go into the holiday season, everybody who might feel really, really triggered or uncomfortable with some of the coercion that they experience from families.
Absolutely. I think that's kind of the key is it safe for you to participate? If it's safe for you to participate at a family event, then participate. If it's not safe for you, then don't. If it's safe for you to go to the Christmas pageant, then go. If it's not, then don't. And that's going to be an individual decision by everybody else, right?
Sure.
And I think it kind of also depends why you're being invited. If you know you're being invited so that you can be proselytized to, I'd probably, I'm not interested in going. But if that's a genuine bid from that person for you to connect with them and to experience something that is important to them, I'd probably go, right? Because usually when somebody's asking you to do something, 9 times out of 10, it's just a bid for connection. It's a bid for if somebody's inviting you into their life, right? It would just be like inviting somebody that may be a Christian. Hey, I'm going to be on Talk Heathen this weekend. Why don't you listen in? You might find this is part of my life. Why don't you come experience part of my life? It's a bid I'm making to connect with somebody else. So if somebody's doing that, if they're trying to connect with me, I'll go. Yeah. Other than that, I'll probably stay home. I might skip out early if it gets too boring, but
oh yes, the memories of being a 10-year-old and going and wanting to, because my aunt and uncle, especially my aunt, was still a very devoutly practicing Catholic, and she would go to midnight mass, and she would love it if the kids came with her. It would make her holiday season, but it was so boring, especially when you're a child.
Right, so safety is relative, right? Like by what degrees? It's not is it safe? Is it unsafe for me? It's will it give me a panic attack? Will it make me bored? And there's probably a fair amount of space between those two.
Yeah. And so I'm very much in agreement with you gentlemen on that. And I also think about it as I don't want these rituals to go away. I would like them to be divorced from their quote-unquote power. But I'm hoping we're still seeing...
Or maybe granted a new one? Is that fair? Like being imbued with a more wise-minded intention around forming community per se, rather than being imbued with a belief that we are like literally summoning God or some of these ideas.
Turning it into allowing it to fade to historically significant, personally important secular tradition rather than like religious dogma. I'm hoping that people are still singing carols and maybe going to mass and being with other people and even having passages read from the Bible to them. Understanding that it is tradition, understanding that it is story, it is myth, but also understanding that some of those stories and myths can be useful. They can teach lessons.
Sure.
And if we can bring it to that point, then it doesn't have to be absolute. You can go and listen to the Reverend talk about the Sermon on the Mount and the wonders of Jesus' ministry, and how the ideas that he expressed were ones we really could, some of them we could take into our own lives and do well, without it being that he's also implicitly saying that Jesus was A, real, and B, God, and came back from the dead, and that kind of thing. And that means that you don't have to then defend the parts of the Bible which aren't very nice, which are morally reprehensible, because you understand that it's a collection of stories and tales and fables that have historical context and significance, but are not essentially true, and you do not have to defend all of them. So, yeah, I'm hoping for a future like that.
Yeah, right. Well, so a question in the chat was something along the lines of like, what happens when faith contradicts reality? And I think that we have to embrace a little bit of squishiness there and acknowledge that even if there is a like capital O, capital R objective reality, that we have no ability to access it, or at least that our ability to access reality is not objective and has all of these different like filters that it passes through. So at the level of experience, there is no quote unquote objective reality. It's all sort of a squishy matter of degrees. And I'm hearing y'all say that like, okay, we can sing along to songs that don't necessarily mean anything to us, or participate in these rituals that maybe we enjoy or kind of create our own meaning for, but that we don't literally believe we are consuming the blood of Christ or some of these kinds of things. As squishy as all of this is, I guess I'm curious if there are examples of that type of like magical thinking or some of these ancient traditions that might really hold us back from understanding the world, and what it looks like to push back against that misunderstanding.
That's where the rubber meets the road on these things. I mean, I don't have the chat up in front of me, but whomever was brave enough to ask that question out loud, I want to take it seriously, because there are certain faith positions that are blatantly and harmfully in contradiction to reality. And so if we can evidence what reality is, or at least come to a consensus on the evidencing of what reality is like, nothing bad's going to happen to you, but there is no reason why you shouldn't get a blood transfusion. And if your faith is saying that you shouldn't, then it's patently a bad idea, right? Like, this thing can save your life, and to reject it for essentially your imaginary friend is bad. But if you're a kind of person who prays for people to do well, in addition to, being proactive and actually helping people and being a good person, but if you think, I want to keep people in my thoughts, and if there is a higher power, I'd like it to sort of intervene for people, I can point to studies that say that that's not really going to work. But and I do have this, I still hold the stance of no zero safe dose of bullshit. But much like things like alcohol, I treat faith and I treat magical thinking like that. It's a potentially dangerous, especially in large doses, substance that is intrinsically harmful. But it's okay if you have a bit of it occasionally. Make things a bit fun, make things a bit
I hear that. That's actually a really fascinating framework. Like, treat your magical thinking like a beer after work. Like, one might be a good idea. 2 or 3 might be just fine. 2 or 3 every single day might be something to be curious about. And 15 or 20 could be really problematic and painful.
And if you can't go through your life normally without it, then you have a real problem and need help. So, yeah.
Interesting questions.
There are a lot of reasons why we have religion, but I think one of the things that keeps people in religion is this tendency of the human brain to be dogmatic. And if I could get rid of religion or dogma, I would get rid of dogma, because religion it came from us. We made it up. It gives us comfort, but we get it where we get in a problem is this dogma where, well, my religion says it has to be this way, this way, this way, and this way. It's like, chill, man. It doesn't.
I'll go into any hardcore fandom space and you'll see secular dogma.
You'll see dogma.
You'll see dogma, not just in religion.
Go and see what people talk about female, like just Google the term female custodies and see the schism of nerds in the Warhammer space over some of your tiny plastic figures may have boobs. And this is a crime against humanity for some people. No God involved. Anyway.
No, that's wild. That's really beautiful. So, Aaron, I really appreciate you joining in on this conversation and everything that we've been talking about. Anything else that you want to add or make sure to hit before we jump on the phone lines?
No, just if you think that your experience is objective and without fault, just do a Google search for optical illusions.
Right? Yeah, absolutely.
Your brain does not interpret the world the way the world is actually real. It just doesn't.
No, excellent point. Well, thank you so much, and we'll see you closer to the end of the show.
See you guys later. I will slip into the shadows.
All right.
Back to the shadow realm with you. Yes.
No, Jamie, I really appreciate that comparison with alcohol. I don't want to get too bogged down into the opiate of the masses type of like cynicism, but I do think that there's something to be said about accepting the fact that we are never seeing reality objectively. We strive to, but also sometimes we can embrace the goofiness of a little bit of carefully curated in healthy doses in objectivity. You know, a little bit of illusion as a treat.
Perfect.
Okay, well, let's talk to DC in Texas, who says universalism is a lie. DC, do I have that right? What's on your mind today?
How's it going, gentlemen?
Brand new.
Doing okay.
Good. Yeah. So I'm a theist, and I kind of heard some of the conversation before I made the call, I guess, concerning the Christian religion, really specifically the Christian religion, because I didn't hear any other religion besides the Christian religion. And I kind of peeped some universal talking points as far as like, well, let's have a conversation and get along. And it seemed like the term kindness was kind of like misconstrued in the sense of like kindness being agreeable. And as far as me being a Christian, you know, kindness is definitely one of the fruits of the Spirit according to the Bible I read. But kindness doesn't mean passive or agreeable.
I absolutely affirm that. We can play with some of these definitions. I'm actually interested or curious what the word universalism is doing here, or what it means specifically here. But yeah, I'll definitely agree. I don't have a dictionary in front of me. I don't want to get too bogged down in any one specific word, but I'll say that any notion of kindness that I want to discuss doesn't explicitly mean agreeableness or a passivity or a willingness to get along. I do a lot of work around the topic of compassion, and we often sort of separate out a nurturing, gentle, agreeable, accepting type of compassion with one that is more fierce, more like yin energy versus yang energy. And a fierce compassion is a willingness to do hard things for the betterment or out of care and concern for somebody, oftentimes ourselves. So yeah, fierceness has a place here as we're talking about kindness. But tell me a little bit more about some of your concerns, or what maybe we said earlier that rubbed you the wrong way.
Well, it didn't rub me the wrong way. It's just more of I just have my objections as far as like, especially when it comes to like, I guess the opposition when it came to like the conversation I had about, you know, should prayer be happening at the Thanksgiving table? You know, what about if we go to the Mass? What if we have a conversation with? I would just say 9 times out of 10, and I would say probably this is anecdotal, but I would say probably this could be objective too. But 9 times out of 10, the atheist is automatically, depending on where they land as far as like being open to the Christian religion, they're mostly likely going to be offended based off the ethical framework of the Christian religion. So I don't think there's no common ground when it comes to Christianity and atheism, unless you're dealing with a liberal Christian that has a so-called faith that affirms sin.
Yeah, see, you're hitting on a really important consideration here. When you talk about a liberal Christian versus, I guess, ostensibly the right type of Christian, I don't mean to put those words in your mouth, but when we're talking about whether it's atheism or Christianity or any number of other credos, we have to acknowledge that there really is your own personal Jesus. right? Like we all have our own understanding of these concepts, and there isn't a specific or a set, this is Christianity. All of these belief systems are going to be very individual to the individual.
Yeah, I don't necessarily fully agree with that statement.
Okay, so tell me about, I guess, your understanding of the correct Christianity and maybe how you came to it.
So I understand, I guess, how do I put it? I know, I guess, within the Western world, there are Christians that do individualize their faith and don't properly, as I would call it, exegete the Bible in its proper context. Because I would argue that the Bible isn't just, it is definitely a personal relationship with Christ, but it's definitely like the Bible is very historical.
There's some objective, like, no, we have to believe or agree to some of these different principles.
Yeah, like say for instance, in the Christian world, Christians believe holistically, biblical Christians to be more specific. If you don't believe in the Trinity doctrine, then you aren't a Christian. Like the Mormons, they don't necessarily believe that Jesus is God. They believe that Jesus was just another man that came to do good works, and it's a certain amount of people that's going to heaven when that's not even recorded in the scriptures which I read.
Well, I'm not a Bible scholar. I am trying to read through the Bible, and I learn more about it pretty much every day through osmosis, if not through direct exposure. So whatever you say about at least your interpretation of the Bible, and whatever version of the Bible it is that you are taking your interpretation from, I'm going to, of course, give you the benefit of the doubt that you believe that is correct. There are people better equipped to maybe argue the historicity. We have other hosts that work with the ACA, like Justin, the Deconstruction Zone, who are biblical scholars. They are extremely well versed in how the Bible was written and everything that came around it and how it's interpreted. But we wouldn't have so many denominations if it wasn't for the fact that the book was up to interpretation and that the dogmas around that book are set down by men. Be it the Council of Trent back in the day or more recent re-evaluations of it, Martin Luther with his note on the door. So what I'm asking you is, how do you know you're right and how do you know that they're wrong?
Well, for me, it's not a matter about me being right or wrong. It's more about what the Bible being wrong. Now, granted, when you refer to the Great Schism, when you're talking about the multiple denominations, that really came from the Protestant separating from Catholics and Orthodox, because before you had the Protestant church, you had Catholic and Orthodox church. But Martin Luther didn't agree with purgatory and other Catholic.
Yeah, plenary indulgence. He had beef with the pontiff, and made it clear. I mean, I'm not really well versed, but I come from England. We are taught quite in depth about the Christian schism because a lot of our history is around that. Be it the War of the Roses, Guy Fawkes, the Troubles, like that Protestants and Catholics don't get on. Trust me, I know. I have seen it firsthand.
Yeah, I just explained as far as because you made the argument about multiple denominations, and I was kind of giving my explanation why that tend to happen within the Western, and so, I think probably, I don't know if the Eastern, at least in the Western world alone.
So sure, but it brings us back to Jamie's question, which whatever denomination, whatever side of whatever schism, whatever creed you do or don't recite, how do you know that it's the right one?
Well, I guess to line it back to whatever the scriptures say, like for me, I'm in the Presbyterian denomination. We read out of the Westminster Confession of Faith, and so whatever's been written and recorded by the scholars, they back it up with the writings of Scripture.
I don't know.
Yeah, I mean that's a nice idea, but the writing of the scripture is oftentimes very vague. In some ways, it is directly self-contradictory, and I'm not saying that that is non-negotiable or that we can't work our way around that. There are certainly ways to navigate that, and people have been doing so for thousands of years. But to just say, "Well, the Bible is perfect and true," it does leave us pretty vulnerable.
Don't disagree with that. That's when I talked to my elders about. Ironically, I talked to one of my elders about that earlier last week, as far as because one part of Christianity that I typically hate is the evangelical world, and I hate the evangelical world because, again, it goes back to individualism, where people can just easily privately interpret the scriptures, where the Bible is pretty clear not to privately interpret scripture. And you get many non-denominational churches, is what they call it, their own private interpretations, because they have beef with the historical Christianity, and therefore they aren't binded by centralized doctrine. The Reform world, we're binded by creeds and confessions that are aligned with how we see the scriptures.
That's the important thing. How we
see.
Now, yeah. I'm giving you all the benefit of the doubt that the scholars, that you're trusting scholarship within your denomination, and you believe that they've got this right, okay? In a similar way that I trust the people who wrote the documents that I use at work. They're medical documents. They were written by doctors. I am not a doctor, but I believe that they know what they're talking about. So I will repeat their words and believe what they have written as if it were true, because I trust them. And so that's rational reasonable, at least, if it's not rational to go along. It's reasonable to think that. But by the very dint that you can talk to an Episcopalian or a Baptist or a Catholic or an Orthodox, and they will tell you exactly the same thing. The scholars of my faith have interpreted the Bible correctly. I trust what they're saying, and their interpretation is different to the one that you believe in. And from the outside, I don't know if any of them are true. So is there some mechanic, some method that we can use to discern who actually got it right, other than just trust in authority?
I guess to rebuttal, I would say there's a such thing called primary issues and secondary issues. Like, as far as Christian orthodoxy in the Christian world, things that are non-negotiables is the Trinity doctrine, the resurrection of Christ, that sin is rebellion against God, and that there is a heaven and that there is a hell. There's non-negotiable issues. Secondary issues would be like on the topics of whether you can listen to secular music or watch secular movies or play sports. And so I guess that's my rebuttal between primary Christian issues and then secondary Christian issues.
So again, you're framing those primary issues as if you have been provided the correct answer. Like, for example, Trinity, non-Trinity, that's a little bit esoteric for me. But one that definitely comes up a lot is, do you gain grace by faith or by works?
Are you asking me a question?
Yeah, in your framework, I'm not entirely familiar with Presbyterianism. So, do you primarily gain entry into the divine by faith or by works?
Yeah. So I'll argue the right understanding of salvation is that you don't earn your salvation. Your salvation was given to you by the blood of Christ. But if you are, here's the thing. Salvation isn't by works, but if you are a Christian, you work out your faith. Because the Bible says in James, faith without works is dead. And then Jesus said, if you love me, keep my commandments. And so, though I'm not saved by my works show evidence of my faith.
Okay, I suppose
right. Okay, so Yeah, so it also, I guess, further follows then that it's not once saved, always saved. That if you are no longer showing good works, then you are no longer connected to or committed to the free gift that was given to you. Does that fair in following?
So I think the whole once saved, always saved. I'm not just putting this on you, just in general, the way I've heard it. It's usually bad faith. I don't think once saved. I think people take once saved, always saved as, oh, I'm saved and I can do whatever the heck I want. No, once saved, always saved is basically me putting my trust in Christ, that Christ has saved, Christ has redeemed me, and Christ will redeem me to the end, because He put His Holy Spirit inside of me to change my ways. You know, I can't do good on my own. Therefore, I depend on the Father in heaven to change my heart, continue to renew my mind.
Okay.
According to my religious beliefs, according to the Bible.
Okay.
Right. So I don't mean for this to be gotcha. And Jamie, I don't mean to interrupt the flow of where you were maybe headed with this, but I just want to point out that just by answering these like 2 or 3 questions, we have already taken you, DC, and sort of categorized you in such a way that would separate you from maybe not the vast majority, but at least a strong majority of Christians over the course of the last 2,000 years. Like, your coalition has already shrunk down in that meaningful way. So when we talk about universalism and the ability for Christians to operate and connect and communicate within their own faith, let alone with the rest of the world, it does start to get very murky and messy really quickly.
Murky and messy in what terms?
Murky and messy in the sense that you've already sort of isolated yourself from the majority of Christians over the course of human history, or over the last 2,000 years, plus or takes, since Jesus did or did not appear the first time. So that division is just rampant whenever we discuss these issues. There has to be some amount of willingness to try and come together, I think I'm trying to express.
Well, I guess when it comes to division, I think the division is necessary in and out the church, especially when it comes to the Christian church. Like I said, there are non-negotiables in the Christian faith. Like, automatically, if you're not a Trinitarian and you claim to be a Christian, I'm automatically going to have to subject you to not being in the faith, and I'm going to have to refute you according to the scriptures on why you're in error. And so I think there are things that absolutely is divisive. Even Jesus was divisive. Okay. The Bible is pretty clear. It said, I didn't come to bring peace, but I came to bring a sword. And that's in Matthew.
Yeah, I will turn mother against daughter, brother against father, son against father. Yeah. Not to derail slightly, but I think the original context we were talking about universalism is that we want to try and find things that it came up under the context of human rights, like universal human rights, right? Now, again, I don't want to assume anything about you, and I want to have a good faith conversation, obviously. It's the whole point we're here. But there are certain things that have been said by certain denominations of Christianity to not be human rights. So, for example, to be allowed to marry and live as partners with whomever you wish, as long as they are a consenting person, a consenting adult person. So, and again, I don't want to put you on the spot, but do you agree or disagree that should be a universal human right?
According to secular beliefs, sure. According to the Bible beliefs, absolutely not.
Okay, so we're at our first loggerhead. Okay, I'm not going to try and argue, again, I'm not saying that you're specifically wrong. We disagree. So when we disagree on something, and I want us to agree on something because these rights are being attacked right now, and I want to find people and join with people who will help me defend those rights. If you disagree that they are a right that should be defended, what steps could possibly we take? Is there any step I could take to convince you to help me to at least, while allowing you to feel in your faith that people, let's just call it what it's like, gay marriage, is not something that is commanded by God, that you should allow people who are not of your faith to engage in that and be legally allowed to engage in that and keep faith to be faith and state to be state and keep them separate. Would you join me at the Capitol building to ask them not to ban gay marriage if that ever came back up?
So, two things. So, one, as much as I vehemently disagree with marriage outside the confines of how God makes it, I would have to be going against my Bible beliefs to be in compromise with that. Two, the government has already kind of given y'all that civil liberty to even be able to have same-sex marriage. So, although I vehemently against it, there's literally a doctrine that was passed with a gay rights activist, to where it was able to have the liberty in America. So
yes, the Obergefell.
Obergefell v. Hodges is, law, or at least interpretation of law that provides for the protection of gay marriage, but it's also under threat. And I think Jamie is asking you the question, would you help us in supporting or maintaining that right? Should it continue to be threatened? Should it be even, outlawed? Is that something that you would protest?
I would protest against it, not for it, because, again, it goes against my Christian ethics.
So this is where the loggerhead comes, because we're trying to build a bridge here. And if there was something I could do to exemplify to you, to show you that it's perfectly fine to let people, let them sin, let God sort about, maybe I'd accept that. If you would be willing to come and say, I believe this is an abomination, but I believe that is up to God's judgment, not the judgment of man. It should remain legal. And if it so happens that I am correct in my faith, then they will face the punishment for their sin in the eyes of the only authority that really matters. I'd be accepting of that. I'd disagree with you, and we may have long and rather terse conversations about that, and I might go into the examples of marriage in the Bible that are not between one man and one woman, because there's plenty that aren't. But I'd accept that. That's where I'd meet you in the middle. I'd go, don't agree with what your faith is, don't agree with what you feel, but if you're willing to put that aside at least enough to go, I want to leave it in God's hands, let them sin on earth if they wish, and then they can face their judgment in heaven, and let them live a happy life here at least. Would that not be enough of a compromise?
Happiness is quite subjective, my friend.
Well, I think if you talk to any gay couple, they would be much more happy being allowed to live an authentic life than not.
Subjective, but not arbitrary, right? Like, we do have these reliable, valid measures of well-being that are worth taking seriously. If I punch you in the face and you say, ouch, that hurts, I don't have really the right to be like, well, but does it really hurt? I mean, what is pain, really?
Mm-hmm.
So
it brings us back to the very beginning. Jamie, I don't mean to interrupt you, and if you have more to say here, we can certainly get to it, but it brings me back to the question that Jamie asked you at the very beginning of all this, DC, which is just, how do you know that your interpretation, your understanding of the Bible, of life, the universe, and everything is correct? You talked about the fact that there are certain doctrines that you are part of a organized movement or culture that all adhere to, that those doctrines, those interpretations, those beliefs come from understanding the Bible and through biblical scholarship, much of which you participate in directly, much of which you participate in by, following the examples of scholars you trust. And I do respect and appreciate all of that. But with each of those steps, we get further and further and further down the road until you find yourself in a religion of, if not one, then a very, very few. And that divisiveness doesn't make you wrong, but boy, it's a long way away from saying, I know that I'm right. And when you say that you know that you're right on these types of issues that are demonstrably causing harm, it very much gives me concern. And I think I would just appreciate some skepticism in your willingness to say, this is clearly the right way to view the world, when the right way to view the world through that lens hurts a lot of people.
What do you can please define your position on what you mean by harm?
I mean, just to take a very easy example, since we've been here, denying one adult person the right to marry another adult person when they both wish to is a harmful act. You know, at the very surface level, it prevents them from having access to the same like financial privileges as other people, but it also causes incredible amounts of psychological, spiritual, if you will, and social harm.
I mean, I would argue, and maybe this is where I'm going to sound bigoted, I would argue it sounds more safe than harmful. One of the biggest ones, which is not even just a biblical thing, biology, is that, just keep it a stat, gay people can't reproduce, which is why they tend to adopt.
They categorically
I don't
can.
want to go too far down that road because plenty of people can't reproduce, and we don't validate their love based on their capacity to reproduce. Like
I have an inherited genetic condition that would make it very risky for me to have a biological child, and therefore I shouldn't. Gay people,
and therefore nobody should ever love you.
Yeah,
and you
I should never get married.
To marriage, it falls flat on its face really, really quickly. And so, if you told me, DC, that your values on gay marriage, for example, to pick one topic, come from your understanding of the Bible, your understanding of scholars that you respect and appreciate's understanding of the Bible, I can at least hear you. When you tell me that it comes from your understanding of biology and philosophy, you make me mad because it just comes across as lazy.
Yeah.
I mean, would you say you were born with the same chromosomes, or you were born with two different chromosomes?
I think I personally was born with 23 pairs, actually. It's so much more nuanced than that. And DC, I don't want to dunk on you. I'm not even a biologist myself. But let me just tell you very respectfully that if you are using your comprehension of biology as an excuse to say things that other people would describe as bigoted, let me just say very respectfully, your understanding of that biology is not sufficient.
Yeah. And all I'm asking for, DC, is a little bit of empathy. Imagine yourself wanting to marry somebody, and you love them with all your heart, and they love you with all their heart, and you would be great for each other, and you would do no harm. No one would be harmed by your union, right? And let's even take your thing like they can't reproduce. This person is infertile. They themselves cannot have a biological child or something of that nature. But you love them so much and you want to marry them, and society at large and faith groups in particular not only scorn that marriage, that person that you want to love and have in your life forever, but deny you the rights of marriage and make it essentially illegal for you to be in that state. How would you feel if you were barred from marrying that girl of your dreams?
Well, let's just be fair. I don't think the heterosexuality would ever be banned because it's
I'm asking a little. I'm sorry. I'm trying not to fly off the handle with you here, DC. I really am.
Compassion. It's the notion that you could relate to or understand the feelings of others. We're not interested in a government or a political policy or a moral society that makes everything great for DC. We're hoping for one that makes things as good as possible and limits as much harm as possible, ideally for everybody. And I hope that you could at least join us in that notion.
Well, to be fair, it wouldn't be just DC. It would be the Christian ethical framework.
The Christian ethical framework, according to your understanding of it, which we've already talked about as being severely mitigated by your understanding of the Bible and your understanding of other scholars' understanding of the Bible. I feel like we're maybe back where we started at the very top. Jamie, if you have anything more that you want to add, we can certainly go there. But DC, I just want to say I really appreciate you walking us through your framework here. And I just want to push back and hope that you can understand that these beliefs have consequences. They don't exist in a vacuum. And when I hear you describe yours, it's not even that I disagree with them. It's that it feels like they're very convenient. They're not super well understood, and they haven't been approached with a lot of skepticism. I know I don't know you very well, and I hope that that's all fair for me to say, but it's very much the impression that you give me when you quickly abandon your earlier explanations to grab some really half-mangled understanding of biology as a way of justifying these beliefs that really do hurt people in the very real world.
Well, hurting is subjective. It'd be according to feelings that nobody's actually getting physically harmed for Christians' beliefs.
Okay. Well,
I can just gesture vaguely towards all of not all of human history, but the last 2,000 years of it have included incredible amounts of people being harmed by quote Christian beliefs, and maybe they're not the right ones, but they're ones under that banner.
And there's more than just physical harm. Don't be reductive. Yeah. You see, I want to give you the benefit of that here, and I'm going to take one more angle, and then maybe we can bring it to a close. So these are very simple questions. One, would you want, ideally, for queer people to be happy and healthy?
I would want them to understand how God made them, which is either they're a man or a woman.
Okay, right, I'm done then. That's an end. Because if you're not going to say yes to that, then here is an example of a bridge that doesn't seem to be able to be built right now.
Yeah, fair to say. DC, thank you for your time. I hope you'll consider some of what we've had to say. And be very mindful about how much you spread some of those notions. Got a quick super chat that I wanted to read and say thank you from Aaron Jenson. Actually, I'm sorry, I'm having trouble pulling that up. What about hetero couples that don't want kids, or older couples who have already had children with other people and won't be having any more? Yeah, these folks should have the right to marry. The idea that the ability to create offspring is the best or only or singular reason that people would be in a committed relationship that is embodied with social institutions, obviously it falls flat on its face. Okay, I'm going to take a deep breath. I'm a little bit miffed, but I think I want to jump into the next phone call. How about you, Jamie?
I was slightly flying off the handle there, and I was going to make a point about that plenty of gay people have biological children. You don't have to...
This is also true. Yeah.
But anyway, let's see who we've got next.
All right. Well, let's quickly talk to Benji in Alabama. Benji, you maybe are pushing back on the idea that some people believe the Bible trumps other civil rights. Do I have that correct?
Yeah. Well, it kind of falls back on the previous call too.
I think the previous caller would say that the Bible trumps what other folks or what our culture broadly would agree are civil rights.
Yeah, I kind of went into that by accident. Actually, I went to church and me and someone got to talking, and they mentioned something, and then I said, well, if the government is wrong, then the people have a right to overthrow the government. It's even in the Constitution itself. And actually, there's some founding fathers, I can't remember exactly, I believe John Hancock is one of them, possibly, that was atheist, that they didn't believe it.
Sure. I mean, a great number of the founding fathers were atheists or deists or these other stripes. We don't necessarily need to get lost into the original intent of the founders of America, because they are not the arbiters of what government should be. They're just a bunch of people who decided what this government might look like, at least at the very beginning. Wow. And while we can honor that contribution and be very appreciative for it, I think we can also have the right to improve upon it and push back on parts of it. But regardless, Benji, let me ask you this in a more straightforward way. Do you believe, or would you agree, that at least some Christians or some people who call themselves Christians would say that the Bible is more important or that it overrides the civil rights of others?
Unfortunately, I know for a fact that there's a good majority that do, even though it doesn't.
When you say even though it doesn't, where are you getting that from, or what does it mean to disagree? Because I certainly am on your side here. I'm sorry, I know the framing here is a little tricky. I agree that the Bible is not more important than the civil rights that we have sort of culturally agreed upon. But where do you come to that from?
Well, several places. I mean, if the Bible was absolute, which I don't believe in absolute certainty of anything or any of that anyway, but let's just say, for the sake of argument, that the Bible did trump the civil rights or whatever, then the world would be a completely different place than it is. Also, this idea that a 2,000 roughly year old book that had ideas in it from people that barely even knew half of, anything really that we know now, it just doesn't make any sense. And then the Tristans or whatever, I mean, I'm not going to go into all of them. I mean, I'm not going to try to stroke with a general brush here, but that's kind of what it is that a lot of Tristans, or the people that would call themselves Tristans, despite their different beliefs amongst one another, might agree and say, oh, well, the Bible is absolute word of God, and so it trumps everything. And that, to me, is completely absurd and stupid, because we live in the here and now, and a lot of stuff that matters to people is actually subjective. There is not really any objective material thing that matters absolutely to people anyway, because everything's going to turn to dust and people die and stuff changes. So there's not really anything that remains constant throughout someone's life. I can speak from that on experience. And everything changes after a while. Society changes, norms change, rules change, laws change, all of it. And stuff that I still see as acceptable 40, 50 years ago, people might see as odd or strange or whatever, because people change with the times. I don't, but other people do.
Now, to steelman their position a little, I would say, well, if something is divinely inspired and perfect, then it doesn't need to change. It was perfect at the time it was written. It will be perfect for all eternity. God is eternal. God is perfect. Again, I don't agree with this, but I can imagine the counter argument. What Christy, I think, was hoping to get, and I think you did explain it quite well, is that it's evident from the fact that things change over time, that norms change, and we accept those changes in norms. Are you saying that's one of the reasons why you don't feel that the Bible overrides?
Well, that's definitely one of the main ones, because I mean, if we was going off Bible laws here, I mean, you would be stoned for having a job on a Sunday. You would be, the people that live with
possibly eaten by bears for not having as much hair. Like I definitely get it, and I agree that we can't use the Bible as this like perfect document. Benji, you and I have had that conversation before, and it does kind of beg the question of this paradox of, if the Bible was written by a God and that document is not endless or timeless, or does eventually change, does that God change, or what does any of this even mean? Can we have a imperfect document created by a perfect eternal being?
Well, see, what I would argue on that too, I mean, I don't know if any Christians take this view or not, but it literally says it in the Bible anyway, that God is actually changing. He's not unchanging, because if you remember in the book of Genesis, and there's several actual accounts of Genesis, there's not just one version, there's several, but in one of them, when he flooded the earth, he dreaded making humans in the first place. So it's obvious that God does actually change his mind. In fact, he changes his mind several times throughout the Bible. And then people are like, oh, well, he doesn't change anything. Everything's predestined. Like today, the preacher guy was saying that God knows all, sees all, knows everything. And that gets into the argument that Matt Dillahunty and several of y'all have made in the past, that if God knows everything, then he knows all of the bad stuff that's going to happen. He knows everyone that's going to hell. He knows all of the bad that will ever happen.
It's why the Epicurean dilemma works the way the problem of evil works like that, and the problem of divine hiddenness. Like we're well aware of the contradictions in the Bible and the fact that it also says in the Bible that he is unchanging, and perfect. I'm fairly certain. Again, I'd have to.
He regretted making humans after he made them and had to flood the earth.
And we've pointed this out to believers, and that's why apologetics exists as a field to explain away these contradictions in and logical flaws.
What would the opposite of an apologist be? Because I'm very good at the opposite of that. Well, I'm kind of good on
anti-apologetics. Is that kind of what you're meaning?
Yeah, what would the opposite of apologetics be? Because I'd be a really good person for that.
Well, I'd say skepticism, because apologetics is explaining contradiction, whereas a skeptic will want to root it out. Like we want consistency and rationality removed and identified and called out, rather than excused and painted over. But yeah, anti-apologetics is the actual term. It's just we will counter these arguments because they are usually
Isn't that part of debate
dishonest
as well. Whenever you're doing debate classes and stuff, because I used to do debates, and you would have somebody that would prove their resolve. Like you would pose a Tristan, and then you would try to prove it wrong. Like they would try to prove it right, then your job was to prove them wrong based on what they say, and kind of turn it and use it against them. And so I'm pretty good at that. But
well, fair enough. I mean, I at the very least, I appreciate the back and forth, the rigor, so to speak, of trying to justify and understand these things. I don't mean to overly reference the previous call, but it really challenges me when I meet somebody who has a belief system that is really opposed to my own and whose values and beliefs are causing harm to people that I care about. But at least there is a mutual sort of respect and a willingness to work together and to try and understand each other, to find common ground. But I lose my patience, kind of the way I did on the last call, when somebody doesn't even know what they're talking about because they haven't gone through that rigor and through that process of trying to work through some of the seeming contradictions, or trying to be skeptical and push back against some of these things. So, Benji, at the very least, for whatever you and I do or don't agree on, I appreciate your willingness to ask these questions and to be curious and to push back, because as we started with, there certainly are people who believe that the Bible on its own merit should trump our civil rights. And that breaks my heart.
Yeah, I do know several contradictions in the Bible. In fact, I talk to Christians on it all the time, but they just stonewall and ignore me and kind of bust it up the rug.
Well, let me ask you this.
I don't know if that's because they don't want to face it, or.
Well, let me ask you this then, Benji. You mentioned debate, and you mentioned it in the sort of classical form of here is the point, here is the debater for, and here's the debater against. Do you believe that is a useful format to come to consensus on a point?
Well, yeah. I mean, if you listen to one side of something and then you point out the flaws to what that one side says, you can. Sometimes it depends on if they're willing to concede or not, but usually you can come to some kind of middle ground.
Yeah.
I noticed with the last caller that wasn't possible, but usually people that, use their brain, if you say, for example, that slavery is okay, which, believe me, I've seen several videos of that. I
remember having a conversation with you about that, Benji, a while ago. But yeah, so.
But if you say slavery is okay, and then you have someone else that points out the problems with slavery, usually those people can come to some kind of a middle ground and say, well, slavery was bad with this and this and this and this.
Hopefully so.
And maybe it was good for the economy, like me and you talked about several years ago. And you actually brought up your ancestors, and all. And I remember all of that, by the way, just off memory. But And then, but we came to a consensus. We came to kind of a middle ground. And
we did.
Like, well,
but
slavery helped the economy, but it still wasn't good for society.
Yeah. So arguing a point of that nature, but we were, that wasn't a classical debate. It wasn't that we had been set the task, slavery is good actually, yay or nay. It was that you at the time seemed to have a belief that it was justified in the past, and I disagreed with that belief. And we had more of a conversation. And what I'm saying is that being good at debates, while it's an interesting intellectual exercise and something that I quite enjoy, and it's quite enjoyable to watch as well, I think it has become it can be too adversarial. If we actually want to concentrate on what is right rather than who is right and divorce our egos from the process, I think we can better sort of move forward towards actually coming to some kind of consensus or compromise. There are many things that I've had to compromise over the past few years, especially living in the US. I've had to think about certain things that I held very specific beliefs on and still hold beliefs on and idealize, but I'm willing to compromise on to a certain extent. And I think that the fact that those who have nefarious means, those people who thrive on our division, who want us at each other's throats, because if we're not at their our throats, we'll be at theirs, want us to drive that wedge in. It's why things like that format where they have 20 people around one person and it's all circus, right?
I've seen those. Yeah.
Right? And so what we're hoping to do, and what I would encourage you to do, is to not make it like I have the right and I'm going to make you see it. It's that I want to know what you think and what you feel. I want to understand you, and then if there are parts of that I disagree with, I will present to you why I disagree with them, along with evidences as to why I disagree with them. And that's why the conversation we had before was effective. That's what I'd recommend to you, Benji.
But a lot of times, right? But a lot of times people don't listen to that side of the story. They like they did with me today. They just kind of sweep it under the rug and just believe what they want to believe.
Well, it's also
I would say that the standard setting for debates, whether it's the way that Matt Dillahunty does it, where he hears kind of one side of it and then he tears it down step by step, which I don't know if he's still doing debates or not. Or how, somebody would call in like this show and then they would say, y'all would say, well, what do you believe? And then, why do you believe it? And that kind of thing. And you would kind of go step by step that way. There's been several accounts in human history of war and hurting people, destroying things and everything, especially in the Crusades. And that was one of the things that just came right up to me during the last call when the guy said, "Oh, well, name an example where this actually hurt."
And we can. I think we're straying, Benji. Sorry, I don't mean to jump in because we are straying a little bit, I think, from the point. And I'm going to kick this back over to Christy in just a moment, but I want to make this point real quick: is that debate as a format has its place, but when we're trying to actually come to consensus, there are certain things in my mind, and again, this is what we were talking about earlier: universalisms, absolutes. There are certain things that are not up for debate. In my mind, human rights are not a subject that I can debate, and that's what causes a lot of friction. Especially, and again, don't want to get too much into it, but in politics, I can debate certain policies and things like that with people who may have a different political opinion to me, in the same way that I can debate epistemology around the existence of Christ or the divinity of Christ or any of that. But when it starts coming down to where the rubber hits the road and a belief is in contradiction to a generally accepted human right, and that to not have access to that human right causes demonstrable, provable harm, there is no debate to be had. Case in point, slavery. There's no debate on that.
Yeah.
Okay? So...
Yeah. The most I could do on that subject with you was just kind of point out the economic benefit, and that was the only benefit there even was, honestly, because it was horrible for everyone involved.
And we shot it down thoroughly. But what do you think, Christy? Do you think that it's sensible to say that there are certain things that are just not up for debate?
Yeah, I ultimately do, and I think that is where the wisdom of all of this lies. You know, we started off this whole episode by sort of asking the question, where do we draw those hard lines? When do we say that we cannot tolerate this level of intolerance, while also hoping to build bridges? And I don't think that there is for lack of a better word, a correct answer to that question. I don't know that there are hard and fast rules that we could philosophically derive and say that this is the point at which. But I do think that we need to be willing to draw those lines from time to time, or at least draw them for ourselves in any particular moment, because people like our previous caller do exist who would say that we can take away certain what I would express as inalienable human rights. And that tension is a problem. That tension is something we have to be mindful of. So Benji, I hope that we can at the very least be rigorous in these things and asking these kinds of questions. And I don't know that there is a hard and fast place that we can draw the line. Anything else that you want to add before we wrap up for the day?
Yeah, so in some of my calls, I watch some of my old videos on YouTube where I call in, and I would saw some of the comments, and there's been people repeatedly, I don't know if they're trolls or not, but they would sit there and say, oh, well, you know, either I have a point, or people would sit there and say that I'm a lunatic who just calls in every day or every Sunday or whatever, and then, you know, waste time. But I bring up very good points a lot of the time, unless I just can't think of anything else.
I don't mean to rain on your parade there, Benji. There was one more point I wanted to make, and that is a great little vector for me to do it. One, how good your points are not for you to decide. That's for the that's for the people watching them and judging them to decide. And secondly, if you are engaging in these kinds of conversations to feel the thrill of being right and having intellectual, perceived intellectual superiority over someone else, yes, that can feel very good, but it is essentially hollow. And it can be counterproductive. Ask me how I know. So, like I said, it behooves us to take our egos out of this fight. The mission is bigger than the man. So I would encourage you, and this is my final word on it, to, if you want to get involved in these conversations, do it for the right reasons. Not to make yourself feel big or good or clever, but because a point needs to be made.
Do it for that. I don't really do it from the ego. I do it to help, you know. I do it to teach, also to spread knowledge, kind of like what y'all do pretty much with the show. You spread knowledge to other people that might not know about the Bible, or you know, point out the problems with it, or because a lot of the stuff that y'all bring up isn't never brought up to the general, you know, Christian, the person that goes to church. They're not going to hear about fallacies or the problems with what's in the Bible, because the preacher's job is just sitting there reading the Bible as if it's true, you know, and so the people that's in the pews, they don't take the time to question it, or, you know, ask, well, why is this relevant, or you know, how would this make other people feel? They don't never take the time to do any of that.
No, all fair to say. So I appreciate you raising these questions again, engaging in that rigor, being skeptical about what we believe, being willing to challenge ourselves and one another in a respectful way to hopefully derive at something resembling truth. We appreciate your time and your call today, Benji, and I hope you have a great weekend.
I do have one other message for Jamie. Have you tried looking into cybernetic eyes to replace the ones that are damaged?
That's a whole kettle of fish that we don't have time to get into. But the fact that I don't want my eyes to be owned by someone else, and I don't want to have to pay a license for them to work. I would say in response to that, you might want to Google stories of support ending for medical implants, because it's happened before, and it ain't great. So
I believe I saw that episode of Black Mirror. It kept me up at night.
Yeah.
With that fascinating thought, Benji, I hope you have a wonderful weekend. So Jamie, I don't want to dive too much deeper into much of anything, but before we do walk out, I wanted to at least take a moment and acknowledge your experience of Benji there and what it's like to have somebody sort of assume certain things about you or about your interests or your desires when it comes to any disabilities or anything else.
I will always try, especially now, to be because I'm trying to hold myself to intellectual and emotional honesty as best as I can. I'm not perfect, far from it, but I will always ascribe to actual curiosity and ignorance, innocent ignorance, anything that is said that might potentially offend me. One of the things that actually annoys me most is when people are hair trigger about their their sort of minority status, where any kind of something that could be slightly construed as offensive sets someone off into righteous indignation, because you're not correcting, you're not teaching, you're not informing, you're just spewing, you're just using this person as a verbal punching bag at this point. So when someone makes an assumption as to I'd be interested in like cyber eyes and stuff, that is a conversation I'd be willing to have. And again, there are nuances around that. And I'd be happy to educate. I don't take that kind of sentiment as, it might sound a little bit condescending, like, hey, you person who has lived this life your entire life and has probably thought about all of these things, I'm gonna suggest this thing to you just in case.
As if it had never occurred to you.
As if it never occurred to me to think about it or investigate it. I think that avoiding being that person is something that we should all strive to do, because, again, I haven't lived the life a lot of people have lived. Other than my disability, I have no other minority status. I am a straight, cis, white male from a wealthy Western country. I am educated. I am I'm not rich, but I'm comfortable enough. I have many privileges and advantages, right? I would never deign to think I could know what it's like to be some people, to live some people's lives, or think I have some solution for them that they haven't already thought of. But if I think of something that I think might be useful, and I am talking to someone, just a little bit of reframing might help. Don't say, have you thought about this? Say, I thought about this. Could you tell me what you think about that? Because it's not, I think you were too, saying, I don't think you've thought about this. It's saying, I'm going to assume you know yourself well enough to have considered this. I'd like to know more about what you think about this topic.
The considerations.
Can you fill me in on your standpoint on it? So frame it from an I think this, I've thought of this, and I'd like to know what you think of it, rather than have you thought about it. That would be my advice.
Yeah. Well, fair enough. I just appreciate you taking a moment to kind of walk us through that experience a little bit. But yeah, now that we're here at the end of the show, I do want to make sure to spend some time thanking our top 5 patrons, as we do every week. I'll say a quick thank you to Oops All Singularity, Dingleberry Jackson, Clevy Helvetti, J.A. Carlton, as well as Casey Kickendall. And then this week's honorable mention in the number 6 spot, we've got Stephen McDougall. Thank you to everybody who gives to us on Patreon. And if you want to have your name read on the air, please consider supporting us at tiny.cc/PatreonTH. I, of course, want to again thank our crew and everybody who helped us put this together, and to thank Aaron for helping us out today. Jamie, is there anybody in particular that you want to send love rings out to? How about you, Aaron? Anybody that you want to send love rings to, or thank, or just comment on from the show today?
Well, we did have one more quickie super chat come in, $1 from Crispin Slit. Thank you very much. Every little helps.
Cool.
So love rings to that person. And I really, and again, this might sound stupid, but I'm sending love rings to every single person who yesterday was out in that crowd, who today has their hands clasped and their eyes closed, and is sort of saying, "I hope I did a good job, Big G. Hope I made you proud. Hope I was the love thy neighbor incarnate for
people
you."
People are
yesterday.
willing to work out their faith in that way by supporting civil rights of others. I definitely hear that. Yeah, Aaron, any thoughts on the show? Any love rings you want to send out before we say goodbye?
I'm sending out love rings to everybody who is overcome by dogma, in hopes that you can free yourselves from that dogma.
Well said. Fair to say. Honestly, I think I will leave it there. I want to say thank you to you two gentlemen, to everybody watching the show. And then, of course, just say that if you don't believe, this is your community, and we appreciate you being here. And if you do believe, we definitely don't hate you.
We're just
not convinced.
We want the truth. So watch Truth Wanted live Fridays at 7 p.m. Central. Call 512-991-9242 or visit tiny.cc/call TW.